There was something suitably Victorian about the envelope, thick, yellowed, and sealed with cracked red wax, that arrived at Thaddeus Quell's modest townhome in Arkham that fog-cloaked morning. The script was ornate, the ink faded to a shade reminiscent of old blood. As Thaddeus held it up to the light, a curious tremble ran along his fingers, though he dismissed it with the laugh of a learned man. Superstition had always lived below his notice, filed away with folk remedies and provincial ghost tales. He opened it with a practiced flick of his letter opener. The words inside summoned his attention more than he expected. A distant uncle, Reginald Quell, dead of natural but unusual causes, had left him an estate in the village of Carroway, a place he scarcely remembered hearing of. Nestled in the shadowy groves of New Hampshire's forgotten hollows, Carroway had once been prosperous, known locally for its textile mill, now burnt out and skeletal beside the murmuring river. The name sparked no memory, but the implications were clear. Thaddeus, though a merchant by trade, had long styled himself a man of intellectual ambition. Membership in the Miskatonic Society for Historical and Alchemical Inquiry had eluded him for years, in part due to his status. Mere commerce to scholars was grease beneath the nail. An estate, however derelict, sourced through lineage, would imply standing. Perhaps enough to be taken seriously at last. Within a week, he departed for Carroway by train and horse-drawn carriage, watching the landscape bleed from industrial certainty into desolate wood and tangled bramble. On arrival, January crouched hard on the land, sky low and leaden, as though hunched with secrets. The townsfolk, few as they were, took immediate note of him. In graying shops and near-silent taverns, murmured greetings carried undertones of something darker than provincial suspicion. More than once, his attempts at friendly inquiry were met with averted eyes and veiled phrases. At the inn, a wiry man offered unsolicited words over a bitter pint. "You'd best be wary near the mill ruins. Past weeks, the river went red, like it knew something woke up again." Thaddeus raised an eyebrow. "Red how?" The man shrugged, eyes fixing on a knot in the wooden table. "Like blood runoff, but thicker. Didn't wash away. The vicar blamed iron sediment from the soil, but—" He trailed off. That night, unable to sleep, Thaddeus stared out from his attic room's frosty window. The hills formed yawning silhouettes under a milky moon. Somewhere down in the darkness, the river wound past cairns of ancient stone and the charred skeleton of the old mill. Perhaps imagination played tricks, but he thought he saw something move along the far bank. Not footsteps, but more a rippling, like something exhaling between dimensions. By morning, he set out for his inheritance with a steel lantern, his journal, and the kind of curiosity only men of intellect exhibit before their ruin. The Quell estate stood a half-mile from the river, surrounded by gnarled woods and creeping briar. Despite its dilapidated aspect, the building wore its age like a secret. Shutters hung loose. Ivy crept like veins across stone. And yet, there was something proud still in its bone-white facade. As he pushed open the creaking front door, a gust of wind, or something colder, brushed past him. It smelled faintly of ash and old paper. Thaddeus Quell had arrived, but whatever dwelled in Carroway had been waiting far longer. The wind clawed at the curtains of Hawthorne Grange as Thaddeus Quell doused the hearth's embers for the night. The estate groaned like an aged beast in its sleep, timber joints warping under the pressure of time and secrets. He had arrived only 3 days prior, Yet something about the place stretched hours into eons. The Carroway locals, their eyes gray with ancestral dread, had offered little more than a crabbed map and murmured blessings when he pressed them about the mill. But now sleep eluded him. Each morning the heavy tomes in the estate's creaking library, books on trade law, classical philosophy, and monastic alchemy, arranged themselves into odd patterns, sometimes forming pentagrams, sometimes pointing spines toward unknown constellations, glimpsed only in oil-smudged dreamscapes. His rational mind told him these were pranks, drafts, perhaps the shifting of uneven shelves. But pipes would whisper syllables not found in any human tongue. And last night, the walls had spoken. What they said he could not recall, but the rhythm pulsed through his skull like a second heartbeat. Compelled by a mixture of curiosity and a dread sharpened by sleeplessness, Thaddeus descended to the ruins of the old mill at dawn. Vapor clung to the sagging walls like cobwebs spun from fog. Exposed beams bore deep claw-like grooves, and beneath matted reed and stone, half buried in the cracked floor, he unearthed remnants of books, their pages waterlogged and tattooed with ink that ran like blood. There, in a rusted cabinet bolted to rock itself, he found it. A vial, its glass blackened with time, stoppered and sealed with crimson wax stamped with a glyph his tongue refused to name. The vial was filled with viscous blood, fresher than any relic had right to be. Holding it, he felt not revulsion, but a warmth spreading through his palm and up his arm, like the residue of a forgotten caress. That night, the gibbering deepened, not just from the walls. The house itself, a thing ancient as the drowned trees that ringed the riverbank, spoke now in indecipherable consonants. Thaddeus found old diaries in the cellar wrapped in rotting leather. They were the scrawlings of men once of science, like himself, who spoke of dreams where the river wept and fed on light. One warned, "Break not the seal, lest Carroway lapse again into the foaming maw of that which hums beneath." More nights passed in fever. Thaddeus ceased writing letters. His business ledgers festered in spilled ink. He watched the river from the study window. It shimmered redder each day. He held the vial now as one would cradle kin, whispering to it in languages he never learned, yet now spoke with uncanny fluency. In the mirror, he noticed something new. His eyes had begun to cloud, as if some other dark stream now flowed behind them. Carroway's silence was never still. It hissed, hummed, and whispered, and deep beneath its reeds and withered roots, something long forgotten listened. The winter sun had long since collapsed behind a veil of leaden clouds when Thaddeus Quell, unshaven and sleep-starved, descended once more into the vaults below the estate. The gibbering had become perpetual, no longer confined to the night. It issued from every cranny of the crumbling house, threading through the hollow walls, echoing in the drains, and whispering beneath the soles of his boots. It was not speech, not truly. Just a choral of bubbling, consonant-devoid madness that wore down the rationale like water wears stone. In his study, books were scattered in arcane spirals, texts on alchemy, Mesopotamian demonology, and the dream scripts of lost Lemuria. Unholy sigils, once gibberish to his pragmatic mind, now arranged themselves into sense and urgency. Sleep brought him visions, a sanguine river beneath the mill, its eddies clutching at unseen limbs, and a great, slumbering form anchored deep within its benthic cradle. The vial had been moved, though Thaddeus swore he had never touched it. Once cloistered in a locked cabinet of worm-eaten oak, it now sat upon an altar of salt and bone in the mill's undercroft, a place he had forgotten existed. Visions guided him there, nude and barefoot by candles' tremor, guided by whispers that caressed and clawed. His ancestors' journal, meandering and partly written in a scrambled dialect known only to the dead, spoke of the entity, how it was hewn from the dreaming void and bound in old Carroway by mingling its essence with human blood. But you could not bottle such a thing, not truly. You could only beg it to sleep. Thaddeus, equal parts terror and wonder, pried the vial from the altar's embrace. It pulsed between his fingers like a second, errant heart. He heard the entity's voice now, not gibbering, but grandiloquent and urgent, promising understanding, salvation, even the collapse of false reality. Something inside him, ancient and traitorous, wanted nothing more than to smash the vial against the stone. He did not remember the act, only the crimson tide. The river moaned as the vial struck water, its surface boiling without heat. From the ruinous mill spilled an exhalation, a crimson mist foul with iron and incense. Screams echoed from the village despite the absence of anyone in sight. The wind recoiled. Thaddeus fled to the keep's tower and watched the river transmute. Every eddy a bleeding eye, every current a tendon snapping through earth's flesh. Trees leaned inward as if witnessing something obscene. Above the mill, a spire of blood rose skyward, then twisted and unfurled into a form that could not be described by Euclidean means. Hands without fingers, mouths without flesh, thought without mind. The poltergeist had been but its appetite. Freed, the entity moored itself to the bloodline, that is, to him. Thaddeus laughed then, not out of madness, not yet, but with the joyless clarity of a man who finally understands the depth of what he does not understand. The scholar merchant turned toward midnight, robe torn and spine stiff, and whispered back to the gibbering. The river answered. Carroway would never sleep again. The winds screamed like madmen through the broken teeth of Carroway's derelict windows, and the air was thick with bile and rust. The river, now a roiling vein of crimson, bled through the village, saturating soil and soul. Thaddeus Quell stood at the scorched mouth of the mill ruins, the vial long shattered at his feet, his palms sliced and slick with his own blood. The entity, no longer a whispering presence but a silhouette too fluid, too many-eyed to belong to any sane geometry, spiraled overhead, stirring an unnatural storm. The beast had consumed the poltergeist's essence and grown monstrous, feeding not just on flesh, but on memory and intention. Villagers, mesmerized by silent incantations embedded in the very wind, wandered aimlessly, their eyes milk-white, limbs twitching to a rhythm baked into the rocks by centuries of occult subjugation. Thaddeus watched as shapes bent in impossible angles emerged from alleyways, faceless and gesturing accusatorily in his direction, progeny of his lineage's blasphemous designs. As bells tolled in discordant peals from the chapel tower, long unused and collapsed on one side, Thaddeus recalled a fragment of arcane symmetry hidden in the diary of his great-uncle, binding through liver, bone, and self-sacrificial will. With trembling fingers, he gouged a sigil into the scorched floor using a shard of bone plucked from the mill's ruin. Every stroke distorted the air, drawing the entity's attention. The creature descended, its mass refracting the fabric of night itself. Quell, half-conscious and whispering syllables that ruptured the listener's sanity, opened his veins over the seal. The gibbering cries reached a climax and abruptly fell silent. Light, cold, and violet burst from the circle, devouring the thing with a banshee shriek. For an instant, all was still. The river cleared, its hue returning to silted gray. Villagers awoke where they had collapsed, blank and weeping. But Thaddeus no longer stood upright. He knelt, face upturned with eyes the shade of deep marrow, watching forces move that only he could see. The knowledge hadn't simply tainted, it had nested. Weeks later, Carroway held its breath as Thaddeus emerged from the crumbling estate for the last time. His gait bore the calm of a man who had bargained with titans and survived. Yet sometimes, just after dusk, those who dared the banks of the Carrow River swore they saw him kneeling again where the seal once burned. The water, they murmured, hesitated as it passed him, sighing not like water, but like memory. And there, on grotesque January nights, the wind still gibbers,